Arno Victor Dorian was born in 1768 to Charles Dorian and his wife Marie. Arno was raised by his father alone in Versailles after his mother would leave them when she discovered Charles's allegiance to the Assassin Brotherhood. At the age of 8, Arno became an orphan after his father was murdered by the Irish-American Templar Shay Cormac. Francis de la Serre, Grand Master of the French Rite of the Templar Order, then took Arno in as his ward and raised him alongside his daughter Elise. Over the years, Arno and Elise would become close friends and later lovers. In May of 1789, Francis de la Serre was murdered at the Palace of Versailles as part of a coup within the French Templar Rite, and Arno would be framed for the murder. While imprisoned at the Bastille, he would meet master assassin Pierre Belec, who told Arno of his assassin heritage, and racked with guilt over his past failures, Arno would join the Assassin Brotherhood in hopes of avenging both his biological and adoptive fathers, while also working to uncover the true instigators of the revolution. Throughout his journey, Arno gained various allies, including, oh god, I am not French enough to pronounce any of these, Antoine Lavoisier, Marquis de Sade, George Danton, Napoleon Bonaparte, and Elise, who had recently been inducted into the Templar Order, also seeking revenge against her father's murderers. Arno and Elise soon discovered that a Templar named Germain had orchestrated de la Serre's death in hopes of reforming the Templar Order and instigating a revolution to his end. When the assassin mentor Mirabeau accepted an alliance with her on the behalf of the Brotherhood, Belec would poison him and would try to kill Elise as well, forcing Arno to assassinate his former teacher. After killing most of Germain's subordinates, Arno would be exiled from the Assassin Brotherhood and would be shunned by Elise, causing him to retreat back to the now abandoned and dilapidated de la Serre estate in Versailles. 6 months later, Elise would find Arno in a drunken, depressed state at the Palais and would apologize to him before they both returned to Paris. After eliminating the remainder of Germain's allies, they would track him down at the temple in July of 1794, where a final confrontation ensued and Germain would kill Elise using the Sword of Eden, and Arno, grief-stricken, would kill him in return. Heartbroken over Elise's death, Arno sank deeper into alcoholism and depression once more and ultimately resolved to leave Paris altogether. After this, Arno would decide to remain in France and rejoin the Assassin Brotherhood, eventually rising to the rank of Master Assassin. Shay Cormac was born in New York on the 12th of September 1731. His mother would die in childbirth and his father would spend a lot of time away thanks to his work, leaving him to be raised by his aunt. During his childhood, he would befriend a boy named Liam, and the two would grow close, considering each other to be brothers. As a teenager, Shay would leave to work alongside his father on a ship until the year 1747, when his father would die in a storm. This event would destroy Shay emotionally, leaving him to wander around as a drunk until Liam would find him again and give him purpose by introducing him into the Assassin Brotherhood. Shay would then serve the Order faithfully, learning from his mentors and eventually becoming a trusted member of the Order, being trusted by the Colonial Brotherhood's mentor Achilles to track down the precursor sites that would decide the fate of the world. Finding a site in Lisbon where Shay would accidentally activate a site, unleashing a massive amount of power that caused an earthquake that destroyed the city. Enraged that Achilles had sent him knowing the danger, he would confront his mentor, but after being brushed off, he would decide to steal the manuscript that was leading the assassins to these sites, but would be discovered, leading to a confrontation where Shay would be shot and left for dead by his former allies. He would then be nursed back to health by an elderly couple, and after taking out a gang that had been bothering them, he would meet a man named George Monroe, who had rescued Shay and would convince Shay to help a friend of his new friend named Christopher Gist, and together the three would begin to work at clearing out New York of its gangs. During one mission aiding Monroe and his men, Shay would run into his old mentor Kesegawase, and the assassin would learn of his survival. Later, Shay would learn that the city George had been stationed at was going to be besieged, but by the time he arrived, the assassins had already begun their siege. Shay would then rush in to help Monroe and would end up killing Kesegawase, who had informed Shay that Liam had gone after Monroe to assassinate him. Shay would then hurry to help his friend, but by the time he arrived, the damage had already been done, and Monroe would die of his injuries. Shortly after this, Shay would be inducted into the colonial branch of the Templars by the colonial Grand Master Haytham Kenway, officially joining the Templar Order. Over the next few years, Shay would track down and kill his former friends and allies, eventually tracking down Achilles and Liam to the Arctic, with Haytham where they would find another precursor site that would accidentally go off. A fight between the two sides would break out and Liam would end up dead after falling during an avalanche, and Achilles would be crippled by Haytham, with the last of his brotherhood being gone. After this, Haytham would entrust Shay to hunt down the remaining artifacts, and from that point on, Shay would serve the Templar Order until his death. Hello and welcome everyone to yet another bonus match. this time with a pair of men from Assassin's Creed who already have some bad blood between them, as this time I will be putting the assassin Arno Dorian up against the man who killed his father, the assassin turned Templar Shay Cormac, to see who would walk away the winner if these two were to ever meet in combat. Now to start off with, as a bonus match, I will be using footage from the Arno vs Ezio video, and as for Shay, I will be using an updated script based on the Shay vs Edward video. And I will be using both of these two exclusively from and at the end of their respective games. Now as one last point, I once again will not be going into the physical capabilities for this matchup, as both men are in peak physical condition and are only a few years away from each other by the end of the game. So I don't think there will be any noticeable difference either way. Right, with all that out of the way, let's start by comparing these two with their weapons and equipment. As a French assassin, Arno had a decent arsenal of weapons, armor, as well as various other tools to aid him on missions. Now, due to the nature of Assassin's Creed Unity, Arno can wield up to 5 different primary weapons. So in order to keep things simple, I'll be giving him a total of 3 primary weapons, along with his handgun, his customized hidden blade, and his smoke bombs. As a master assassin after the death of Elise, Arno would go on to wield the depowered Sword of Eden as his primary weapon. This sword was a bastard sword about 3 feet in length from the butt of the handle to the tip of the blade. As a bastard sword, this weapon was capable of being used both as a slashing and piercing weapon. However, the straight blade and pointed tip making it a bit more effective at thrusting strikes. His second weapon was a halberd, a 2-handed pole with a spiked axe head attached to a 5-foot pole. The length of the weapon making it easier to defend with, and it was very effective at keeping opponents at a distance. As a 2-handed weapon, more force can be put into the power blows, but the length requiring a wider swing. And finally, he had his own guillotine gun known as the Eagle. The guillotine gun was, simply put, a grenade launcher with an axe head attached to the barrel. This weapon, while used in melee combat, functioned similarly to a heavy axe, though as it needs to function as a grenade launcher as well, it is shorter. Typically used as a chopping weapon, though Arno also shoots grenades which can clear entire groups in a single shot. Much like every other assassin of the Brotherhood, Arno carried a hidden blade, a small 6-inch blade inside of a wrist gauntlet. However, unlike many assassins before him, Arno didn't use it in combat, instead seemingly using it primarily as a stealth weapon or to finish off wounded opponents. However, Arno did regularly use his Phantom Blade, a drawstring attachment to his hidden blade allowing him to fire the blade itself. As a silent, ranged weapon, it allowed Arno to take opponents out from a distance without alerting anyone to his position, functioning similarly to a crossbow, as well as the optional Berserk Blade, which is coated in a toxin that will cause someone shot with the weapon to attack anyone nearby, going apeshit. His pistol was modeled like a dueling pistol, but it was customized to be capable of firing 6 shots before needing to reload it. As a master assassin, Arno wore a set of noble-looking robes equipped with lightweight leather armor, giving him, honestly, very limited protection in favor of not hampering his agility. However, in fairness, light armor is still much more preferable to no armor. As a master assassin turned Templar, Shay was likely familiar in most, if not all, types of weapons that would have been available to him in his lifetime. But for this matchup, Shay will be bringing a total of 10 weapons in his engagement, primarily from his standard arsenal. His primary melee weapon was a 3-foot-long bastard sword, custom made for use by Templars, which he uses in combination with a similarly designed dagger, roughly 6 to 8 inches in length, each weapon being designed to be used in tandem with each other, using his sword for his primary offensive while using the dagger to deflect strikes and slip past an opponent's guard. Both weapons are designed with a straight, double-edged blade, which would make them both more specialized for thrusting strikes, to pierce heavier armors while still being capable of delivering effective slashes. He also carries 2 flintlock pistols given to him by Achilles. However, these weapons are very inaccurate. Historically, it would need to be used within about 60 feet of range for accurate shots. While he was an assassin, he received extensive training with his hidden blades, retractable blades that are roughly 8 inches in total length and extend from wrist gauntlets, learning to use them primarily as stealth weapons but also as a substitute for more conventional melee weapons such as swords and daggers. Along with his pistol, Shay will also be bringing an air rifle, which, as the name suggests, is a rifle designed to fire compressed air silently, firing darts from a distance. He'll be bringing 2 effective dart types into this engagement, a sleep dart which will almost immediately knock out his opponents, and a berserk dart, which one-on-one doesn't really have much application as its main function is to put opponents into an uncontrollable rage where they will attack anything. But in a 1-on-2 or even general group engagement, this would have some very useful tactical applications. And while I don't believe it will be effective in combat, I should note that he does use firecrackers in order to set off explosive barrels and other similarly gunpowder-based environmental factors. This air rifle also comes with a grenade launcher attachment, which allows him to fire explosive grenades at reasonable but relatively short distances to safely take out entire groups of opponents or tear down the very environment he's fighting in. During his time as an assassin, Shay was trained to use a rope spear in various assassination scenarios, and even in combat. Rope spears, while far from a traditional weapon, did have various uses mid-combat. Shay would typically use this weapon to forcibly close the distance between him and his opponents, or throw them to the ground and then open them up for a killing blow, as well as using it in tandem with his sword, allowing him to block a strike with his sword and then throw the rope spear into a killing shot, taking out his opponent. He also carries a single throwing knife as a last resort range weapon. This blade is roughly a foot in total length with a thin blade that made it lightweight and easy to throw further distances, allowing Shay to get easy kills with this weapon. And finally, while not shown, it's implied that Shay wears leather armor under his coat, which while sacrificing a good bit of protection also allowed him to stay mobile and pull off faster maneuvers mid-combat. Both Arno and Shay are bringing sizable and respectable arsenals for their respective time period, but I think it's easy to see even at a basic glance that Arno has the advantage with his weaponry. However, once again, I will not be granting Arno his active Sword of Eden, as by the time he gained it, it was already deactivated, and let's be honest, this wouldn't be much of a fight in the first place if he did have it. So even if he did have it while it was activated, I would still restrict it for the sake of a fair fight, unless putting him up against another opponent where they also had a active Weapon of Eden in their primary arsenal. Comparing their basic swords, both are bastard swords of a similar length, the biggest difference being that Arno's sword is more durable as it is an artifact from the first civilization. However, I don't think that this will really be a factor, as I don't see Arno's blade breaking Shay's as it is depowered. The only real difference is that Shay is going to be bringing two blades into this engagement with his dagger, which could let him get around the blade while Shay's using his own. But in a pure one sword versus one sword duel, there really wouldn't be much of an advantage. Now, Arno's halberd is a completely different story. Its better range all but negates the advantages of Shay's primary weapon, both being able to hit with more force due to its range, allowing for more momentum and wider arcs, and easily being able to keep Shay at bay, which would make his much shorter dagger a non-factor in this fight, unless Shay got in extremely close. Which, to be fair, if he does, the halberd would be more of a liability than a boon, but due to the weapon's length, I don't see Arno letting that happen, on top of generally being easier to defend with due to the length of its handle. The guillotine gun against Shay's sword and dagger combo would be a more balanced exchange, with Arno holding the strength advantage and Shay holding the speed advantage. Now, you could argue that this would let Arno get past Shay's guard with its heavier strikes, but on the flip side, you could then make the argument that Shay's better speed with his weapons would allow him to move around Arno's heavier blows and land counter strikes. So overall, as melee weapons, they are even, but with this weapon, Arno does have the advantage of being able to fire grenades whenever he wants. However, to be clear, I don't think this will play much of an advantage in melee combat, since Shay is going to want to keep Arno in close range, and I have a hard time believing that Arno is suicidal enough to shoot a grenade at his own feet. Shay's hidden blades are going to be more effective than Arno's, primarily because Arno's hidden blades aren't meant to be used in combat like Shay's. Not to mention, unlike Arno, Shay has two that can be used in tandem in combat, even being used to block and parry strikes from swords. While even if Arno's hidden blade is capable of this, which there's no reason to assume it would, he wouldn't be capable of doing so. Moving on to ranged weapons, Arno's pistol is superior to both of Shay's, being able to fire 3 times the amount of shots before needing to reload in his single pistol than with Shay's dual pistols. Shay's darts likely won't play a role in this engagement, as Arno's outfit is going to be too thick for them to penetrate, meaning his sleep and berserk darts will be useless here. The grenade launchers are roughly the same. While there's probably some slight differences in range and explosivity, and the blasts, it's not really going to make much of a difference, as both are going down in one shot from these weapons. And realistically, I don't see either playing a factor in a close quarters engagement. With their extra projectiles like the Phantom Blade and Shay's throwing knife, Arno is going to have both the range and edge advantage with these projectiles. Not to mention his berserk blades, which unlike Shay's darts, will be able to penetrate the armor. Though I doubt Arno would use this in a 1-on-1 scenario, it is still another option he has should he have to take it. In terms of armor, both men wear leather armor for the same reasons, so I doubt it's going to give either of them much of an edge combatively speaking. Overall, while holding a few advantages of his own and matching his opponent in some areas, Shay does fall a bit short compared to Arno, particularly in the range department, but Arno's halberd is also a direct counter to his sword and dagger combo, and his guillotine gun is roughly matching it. And so, I grant Arno the edge in weapons and equipment. Like in all of my matchups involving combatants using melee weapons, I will be using Star Wars lightsaber fighting forms to better and more easily describe how both of these opponents approach combat with their particular styles. Now, with that out of the way, let's begin. Growing up as a French nobleman, Arno was taught the basics of fencing at an early age by Templar Grand Master Francis de la Serre, seeing as even before joining the Assassin Order, he was a skilled swordsman, only having his skills honed during his training with Pierre Bellecq in the Bastille and years as an assassin. Arno's main fighting style with his Blade of Eden was Form 2 Makashi, with elements of the Form 5 variation Gem So, mainly using Form 2 and selectively implementing Form 5 for its use of power-based attacks as well as some defensive maneuvers. Much like fencing, Form 2 was a fighting style designed purely to be used against other sword-wielding opponents, maneuvering maneuvers like feints, sword binds, and parries to manipulate his blade in order to slip past opening in his opponent's guard with a precise and often fatal strike. Users of Makashi were also taught to use footwork and stamina management to avoid overexerting themselves. The form had two main weaknesses. The first was its inability to implement true power attacks, which would directly lead to Arno to utilizing Form 5 style heavy blows, and had a higher difficulty when defending against projectile-based attacks, which I doubt Arno ever had the chance to work on. Using the halberd and guillotine gun, Arno mainly fought using Form 5. However, unlike with the sword, with these weapons, the power-oriented heavy blows of the form were his main method of attack, and not just used to break his opponent's guard. Gem So was primarily a mixture of defensive maneuvers designed to open up an opponent's guard, and then countering, as well as power blows designed to smash through someone's guard. Experience-wise, Arno is almost an exact mirror of Shay Cormac, only in reversed, being raised up and taught by a Templar, eventually using the skills taught to him by de la Serre as an assassin, making him even more effective at combating Templars, as it's very likely that he was being groomed to eventually become a Templar just like Elise, and as such, would recognize their techniques and tactics as one his own teacher and adoptive father de la Serre used. Tactically, Arno was very much a product of his time, with the French branch of the Order in his era lacking major power, resulting in Arno being taught to rely on stealth to silently eliminate targets and get out undetected, with direct confrontations being more common than most eras due to the widespread violence of the French Revolution, but still being a last resort. Shay would learn to fight at a young age, being trained in swordsmanship and marksmanship, already being a skilled fighter by the time he was accepted into the Assassin Order at the age of 17, whereas already impressive skills would be further improved with their training up until Shay would defect from the Order and turn their own techniques against them, eventually nearly destroying the Order and killing 4 Master Assassins, 3 of which had a large part in his own training. Shay first learned to fight on his father's ship, where he would regularly fight pirates, learning the basics and expanding his skill in swordsmanship. However, I believe that he didn't adopt his dagger and sword fighting style until his time with the Assassins, as Connor Kenway, who coincidentally also fought using a dagger in combination with his main weapon, had the same primary teacher in Achilles, meaning it's likely something the Assassin mentor taught to most, if not all, of his students, or at least the ones he directly taught. Speaking of this dagger and sword fighting style combination, I no longer believe that this is a combination of Gem So and Form 4 Taru, but rather the Form 6 variation Jarkai. This style taught users to maintain a strong offense, as the speed of the attack that 2 blades allowed would overwhelm most opponents. A typical maneuver was to continually attack with one blade while relying on the other for defensive coverage, ensuring that the duelist could keep up his guard even as he attacked. However, it was common that both blades were used for the defensive purposes, keeping up a continuous front wave assault. Another advantage of Jarkai was that the 2 blades made it easier to hold off multiple opponents, as one simply had more blades to parry with. She was also skilled in binding up his opponent's blade and then dealing a fatal blow, even doing this to multiple opponents at once. Part of what made Shay such a deadly fighter was his flexibility in combat, being more than capable of switching from a defensive position to a crushing offense on the fly in combat. This, along with his combined years of Templar and Assassin training, as well as implementing all of his tools in the middle of attack to bring down his opponents more quickly, made him a devastating opponent to any combatant he would come across during his lifetime. As a quick aside, while in gameplay, Shay uses his sword and knife in a nearly identical way to Edward Kenway with his twin swords, it's far more likely that Shay used his sword and knife similar to how Connor from Assassin's Creed 3 does this, as they likely receive similar training from Achilles, just more directly in Connor's case, with the animations in the gameplay of Assassin's Creed Rogue likely just being the fact that the animations are a leftover asset from Assassin's Creed Rogue. Both Arno and Shay are almost mirror images in their upbringing and training, with Arno being groomed to become a Templar and eventually joining up with the Assassins, while Shay doing the reverse, becoming a Templar after spending years as an assassin. Now, as for whose experience is better, it's undoubtedly Shay's. True, Arno was trained to fight by and was likely being groomed to eventually become a Templar, but he never directly learned from them, and he never took their tactics as his own. Arno was far more an assassin than he was a Templar. Meanwhile, Shay spent many years both as an assassin, learning their tactics and their methods before learning to use them against the very people who had developed them as a Templar, on top of implementing Templar-based assassin counter tactics regularly. While true, Arno will know Shay's Templar-based combat moves, and that will help him, the same can be said for Shay with Arno's assassin-based moves. And in fact, in the case of their hidden blades, while unlikely to be a factor, Shay would in fact make short work of Arno with these weapons, as unlike Shay's branch, Arno's Brotherhood didn't teach him how to use these weapons mid-combat. Now, you could argue that Arno's assassin training would be different as he operated during a time when assassins in France had to be far more open and willing to use violence thanks to the open chaos and aggression of the French Revolution. But if you made that argument genuinely, you'd be ignoring the fact that Shay combated the colonial assassins at the height of their power, with open violence being common practice within the assassin ranks, with assassin leaders taking part in raids and military-based conflicts, even going as far as to operate as violent gang leaders, which were so powerful they required military force to bring down. So Shay's assassin opponents he has already killed are just as, if not more openly violent than Arno's branch ever was. In terms of their combat styles, Shay's dual-bladed combative style is simply superior to Arno's fencing. Starting with their differences, Shay's combat style was more proactive with its use of dual blades, which will allow Shay to attack twice as much as the younger assassin, as while being far easier to defend with, using one blade to defend and another to attack, which could easily be used to stop and take advantage of Arno's precise blows, to parry and then land a killing blow in the same motion. Both styles commonly implement sword binds, but Shay's style is more proactive and effective. And again, this can be traced back to the use of dual blades. While true, just because you have two blades, this doesn't automatically mean you're going to have an advantage in swordplay, as these styles can be fought around. But when you're using two blades for the same general purpose as a fighting style with one blade, you're gonna simply have more advantages and opportunities. Now, if Shay wasn't a master swordsman like the other protagonists, I could realistically see Arno getting around this disadvantage and still managing to land a killing blow. But Shay is, and Arno's going to have to just deal with that while using his Blade of Eden. Experience-wise, by the events of each game, Shay is going to have much more experience compared to Arno, as Shay was already a skilled swordsman who took part in actual combat by the age of 17, and by the end of his game he was in his mid-20s, compared to Arno, who didn't take place in real combat till he was already an adult, and was, in comparison, younger than Shay by the end of his game. Now, Arno's other weapons could be another story, with the style he uses with those weapons are more defined by their power blows and counterattacking. Now, I believe the power blows will be effective as they are from larger weapons that will hit with more force, which will force Shay to use his primary sword to defend, as the dagger simply can't defend against power blows from weapons of that size, and would generally be less effective, especially against the halberd. His dual blades would still be able to bind up these weapons, but he's not going to be able to slide past his guard, as the length and power will make fencing maneuvers simply impractical, meaning Shay is going to need to rely on his aggression to match Arno's force. And overall, I think these two forms will even each other out, with the slightest edge going to Arno for his range, and negating a major advantage that Shay has grown to rely on. Shay also has the advantage of implementing his wider range of weaponry into combat, including his rope darts and pistols to deliver killing blows. Overall, Shay understands Arno's battle mentality just as well as he does himself, is more experienced having fought for much longer, has a superior fighting style, and is more willing to use his full arsenal, and has tailored his fighting style specifically to counter Arno's own. And so, I undoubtedly grant Shay the edge in combat skills and tactics. Let's set up this fight. Once again, we'll be using the setup where a pair of bored Abstergo employees set up a simulation, this time with a bit more juice to it when they discover that Shay was actually the man who killed Arno's father. The simulation loads in. Shay is sitting on the bench near the front of a church when a younger man sits down next to him. The two sit in silence, immediately recognizing each other before Arno speaks. Do you know who I am? I can take a few guesses. I take it you're not here to talk. Arno's fist tightens as Shay barely spares him a glance. No, he growled before shoving his hidden blade into Shay's face. The older man catching his wrist and moving to counter with his own hidden blade. But at the last second, Arno spins around, driving his elbow into the Templar's back. The two separate and draw their blades, Shay acting first, thrusting his sword at Arno's throat, only for the assassin to deflect the strike with a flourish of his own Sword of Eden, immediately going to thrust his blade at Shay's throat. The Templar being forced to use his dagger to force the blade to the side, narrowly missing. Shay then moves in, using his hidden blade in combination with the close proximity to go for a kill shot. Arno, not accustomed to someone using their hidden blade in the middle of combat, barely reacts in time, moving his head out of the way and flipping Shay over. The two then roll on the ground, resembling more tangled limbs than two men fighting to the death before Arno ends up on top. The younger man immediately starts choking the life from Shay, a rage in his eyes that keyed Shay in on the fact that this wasn't assassin business. He was here for something else. Not that that meant Shay was just gonna roll over and die, because he might have wronged this man somehow in the past. Pulling his flintlock, he shoves it into Arno's face, and the assassin is forced to grab it and force it out of the way as Shay fires, taking off a piece of Arno's ear. Yet the master assassin keeps up the stroke, but with an arm struggling with the Templar's own, Shay is given the opportunity to stab up into Arno's side, causing him to flinch and giving Shay the room to kick him in the gut, causing him to stumble, but he does manage to stay on his feet. Shay then pulls out his second handgun the moment he's on his knees, but before he can fire, Arno quick draws and shoots the gun out of Shay's hand. The pair stare each other down as Arno contemplates shooting him then and there. "On your feet, Cormac," he demands, making a rising motion with his pistol, Shay obliging and standing up, but not raising his arms. "You know, I could end this now, but that would be letting you off too easily," he said, throwing his handgun to the side, intending to go at it until Shay was on the ground bleeding out. Then, and only then, he'd let the man die. With that, the two re-engage. Shay gets right back into it, now using both blades at once, and starts to get the better of Arno, using his sword to cut at the Frenchman and his dagger to parry his opponent's own attacks. Arno, for his part, was holding his own well enough, but he can't land more than a glancing blow against the Templar. Meanwhile, Shay's dual blades are allowing him to easily handle the fencer's assault. Shay decided to then ramp up the pressure, literally leaping at Arno as he thrust his sword at his opponent. As Arno sidesteps the blow, however, Shay then thrusts his dagger forward, cutting into Arno's arm and binding up his sword before headbutting and disarming the man in one motion. Now reeling on the ground, Arno rolls at the last second, getting out of the way of a downward stab and raising his arm, shooting his phantom blade into Shay's chest, the leather armor barely keeping the knife from hitting a vital organ. As Shay pulls the blade out, Arno pulls his halberd out from his back. Shay carefully studies the weapon, knowing that he's gonna have an issue getting around its length, but is far from intimidated, readying his blades and marching forward. And Arno immediately puts his weapon's length to use, keeping Shay at a distance where he can't effectively use his sword and dagger combination, and is forced to just defend with his sword. Sensing an opportunity, Arno takes a step back and brings the polearm down, and in response, Shay raises his sword, blocking the blow. But as he does, he realizes Arno now had the spike leveled directly at Shay's face, as he thrusts the halberd like a spear. Shay barely moves his head to the side in time to not get impaled. And the moment after, Arno pulls back on his weapon with all of his might, using the axe out of the halberd to catch on the edge of Shay's bastard sword, ripping it from his grasp. Shay immediately tries to close the distance and regain his lost weapon, only for Arno to use his halberd to support his weight as he jumps up, putting all of his force into a kick with both legs, throwing Shay onto his back, before literally leaping at the opportunity and stabbing down with his halberd. Shay manages to get out of the way in time, and having no other melee weapon that would realistically work against Arno's halberd, pulls out his air rifle and uses it like a musket. But knowing he has to land a killing blow, knows he can't end the fight with this weapon, and simply starts buying time until he spots an opening as Arno goes for a wider arc with his swing. And Shay almost immediately capitalizes on this, using his rifle to stop the weapon and leave Arno open for a strike. The assassin, having seen how Shay used his hidden blades before in combat, expects Shay to rush in, and taking a page from the Templar's book, readies his hidden blade to stab the man as soon as he got close. Unfortunately, that course of action is exactly what Shay had been taught to do as an assassin, and as such, he moves to counter Arno's attack before it even launched. And suddenly, Shay throws his rope dart into Arno's shoulder above his hidden blade, and with a powerful pull, he brings the shocked assassin forward and thrusts his hidden blade into his chest, before doing it again and again and again. Arno starts to cough in his own blood as Shay looks the man in the eye, no malice or anger coming from the older man. "It's Dorian, right?" Shay asked, recognizing the man who looked enough like his father for Shay to make the connection, sighing as he pulled the hidden blade from Arno's chest. "For what it's worth, I'm truly sorry. And with that, he thrusts his hidden blade into Arno's neck, causing the man to cough blood onto his face. Not even reacting, Shay then carefully lowers his opponent to the ground, holding his head in his free hand as he pulls the hidden blade and lays Arno's corpse on the floor, the simulation ending as he tells the assassin to rest in peace. And with that, I declare Shay Patrick Cormac, the Assassin Hunter, the winner. While Arno is certainly a skilled fighter and one who brings a respectable arsenal into this encounter, overall his weaponry edges weren't enough, and his combat skills simply didn't stack up to Shay's in the end. While yes, Arno's halberd had far more reach than Shay's sword and dagger, that's not to say that Shay had no ways to get around this length advantage. His various projectiles could be used to either end the fight regardless, and if worst came to worst, Shay is no stranger to disarming opponents of their weapons, while Arno can't say the same. And true, that doesn't take away from Arno's overall weapon advantage. But the fact is, he just isn't bringing anything to this fight that Shay can't just push through. Now, once again, I freely admit that if you grant Arno an active Sword of Eden, that would no longer be the case, and that Arno would win for his weaponry alone. But I've already gone over why I wouldn't grant that to him, so going over it here would be redundant. Combat skills is mostly due to experience than anything else. While I do stand by the points I made in the combat section and think that Shay is a more skilled swordsman, the advantage of being trained by the same organization to use the same style of combat and the same tactics, and then using these lessons to develop exact counters to these maneuvers gives him a huge edge, not just against Arno, but of the vast majority of assassins in the franchise. Now, once again, Arno would have a similar but lesser advantage, as considering as far as we know, it's just with swordplay, as Arno should have been trained to fight like a Templar, but he was not trained to plan out attacks, nor did he spend years operating as a Templar like Shay did. But that's just my opinion. What do you think? Do you agree that history's greatest assassin hunter would walk away the winner? Or do you somehow think that the French master assassin would avenge his father? Let me know in the comments down below if I got anything wrong. Please feel free to correct me. Right, as always, thank you all for listening. Go check out the users Winter Ghost, 3 Topics Gamer, and King Cameron, and I will see you all very soon next time.